Good morning and welcome to this session of Business Breeders, a live webinar series hosted by Goodman Group here at Brock University. My name is Abdul Rahimi and it's my pleasure to serve as the Director of Goodman Group at Goodman School of Business right here in beautiful Niagara. Snowy today, but beautiful snow, and here at Brock University. Goodman Group is a community-focused learning and development services provider that works to support professionals, businesses, and entrepreneurs pursuing growth through professional development certificate programs, executive education, consulting services, and startup support for those on campus and within our community. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to today's session as you take a break with us by taking part in this webinar. This webinar series aims to provide 45-minute breathers filled with insightful discussions on timely topics that are relevant to businesses and everyday lives, led by award-winning Brock University faculty and leading industry experts who are encouraging thoughtful debates and keeping us all feeling connected together. This webinar series is hosted on Wednesdays from 11 to 11:45. Momentarily, I will be handing the screen over to today's webinar lead, and that's our very own Dr. Lynn Wells, who will be leading today's discussion. Lynn will speak for approximately 30 minutes, and then we'll spend some time answering your questions. Some of you have already kindly posted your questions at the time of registration, so thank you very much for those. You may also post your questions live using the chat feature, which is open now. And when you're there, do say hi to Cassie as well. You may also tweet your questions, and that is at GSB Goodman Group. That is at GSB Goodman Group, all one word. Now, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce to you today's webinar lead. That is Provost Lynn Wells, who is a Canadian scholar, teacher, and university leader with over 15 years of experience in senior academic leadership positions. In year 2020, Dr. Wells was appointed as Provost and Vice President Academic right here at Brock University. Prior to holding that role, she served as Associate Vice President, Students and Teaching at McEwen University in Edmonton and held a number of senior positions at the University of Regina, including Acting Dean for the Faculty of Arts and Associate Vice President for Academic. For 7 years, Dr. Wells supported the work of national reconciliation with Indigenous people of Canada through her services as Vice President Academic and a Special Advisor to the President at First Nations University of Canada. Dr. Wells is a respected scholar in her field of contemporary British fiction, having published 2 books and numerous articles. Her fields of scholarly interest include urban representations, literary ethics, and surveillance studies. She has served on the Executive Committee of International Association for Philosophy and Literature and as a board member for the Canadian Federation of Humanities and Social Sciences. Her accomplishments are numerous. Her participation is much appreciated here. Well, Lynn, welcome and thank you for being here.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today's presentation. I look forward to the discussion afterwards. Today, I'll talk about the challenges of managing a Canadian university during the COVID-19 pandemic and about the massive changes brought about by this public health crisis that are affecting the post-secondary sector nationally and around the world. This transformational moment calls on university leaders to be responsive to new opportunities while remaining cognizant of institutional history, structure, and culture. Let's begin with a brief retrospective. In March 2020, in response to the growing COVID-19 crisis, Canadian universities announced that they would be moving classes, research activities, and student services online for the rest of the semester. Enrollments shifted, with increased participation in spring online classes, but variable rates of return by domestic students in the fall. Those international students who left Canada in the spring found it difficult, if not impossible, to return. Most institutions felt the financial impacts of both lost tuition and ancillary revenue. Since March, universities have functioned in a mostly virtual environment, providing reduced on-campus activities as allowable under public health guidelines, which vary by province and are in constant flux. With wide-scale vaccination underway, there is the real prospect that universities will be able to return to some of their pre-pandemic activities by the end of 2021. But what will be the long-term impact of the pandemic on how universities operate, especially as they play a key role in social and economic recovery? From the past 10 months, we have learned that the pandemic has changed our lives in profound ways that are unlikely to revert completely to normal once the virus is under control. While we all long for a return to a world where people interact more freely, we also know that the lockdowns have taught us new ways to connect with others and to carry out our daily activities. Building on the lessons of the pandemic to meet the changing needs of society will position Canadian universities for success in the years to come. To do so, we must be nimble and adapt to new ways of doing things while preserving the critical values that have defined the university for centuries. The genesis of the modern university began in the 11th century with the University of Bologna, which expanded beyond the specific training provided to monks and clerics to include international scholars and ideas. Over the next few centuries throughout Europe, universities provided professional education in fields such as law, medicine, and theology to a select number of wealthy men. These early universities insisted on adherence to religious doctrine until the Enlightenment, when secularism and scientific thought gained ascendancy. Throughout the Industrial Revolution, universities evolved to support the needs of rapidly changing economies, including through the growth of pure and applied research. As universities spread around the world, higher education became more broadly accessible through a combination of public and private funding. By the 20th century, tertiary education was open to people from different classes, as well as to women. With the massification of universities, the link between higher education and general economic prosperity became stronger. This tie to the economy led to an increase in corporatization, with private university picking up the shortfall caused by decreased public funding, especially in the United States. For example, Emory University in Atlanta, founded in 1836, was nicknamed the Coca-Cola University due to the significant financial role the company and its founders have played in the school's history. While the pressure for private sector involvement in universities has increased, so too has the call for greater public accountability, with governments using metrics such as enrollment, research productivity, and graduation rates to determine investment of public funds. With the shift to a more neoliberal, market-driven approach, modern universities have continued to evolve to reflect the times and societies in which they exist. One of the central values of the modern university is academic freedom, which has many definitions, but is typically outlined to include the freedom to teach, the freedom to conduct research and publish results without interference, the freedom to express opinion, including about the academic institution or the system in which people work, and freedom from censorship. In the early 20th century, the American Association of University Professors established the concept of tenure as protection for academic freedom. Today, both academic freedom and tenure are enshrined in the language of collective agreements between faculty and universities throughout North America, providing a counterweight to the forces of corporatization and underpinning the principles of collegial governance by which most institutions operate. Academic freedom means that professors and librarians have a key role to play in decision-making at the university. In most Canadian universities, academic collegial governance takes place at multiple levels, with the Senate, composed of elected faculty representatives, serving as the highest academic decision-making body in the institution. Senates approve new degrees in keeping with highly structured requirements. The programs are then subject to government approval processes that require considerable time for completion. While the Senate has purview over academic matters, the board has authority over the university's finances and general business conduct. This bicameral system allows for checks and balances, ensuring that both academic and administrative priorities are addressed. Collegial decision-making requires intense consultation and consensus building. The voices of faculty, students, and administration must all be considered when reaching decisions that affect the institution. While collegial governance can be seen as a model of democracy, it can also lead to slower decision-making. The pandemic has been an interesting case study, as it has required decisions to be made quickly and sometimes without the kind of consultation to which universities are accustomed. In a recent survey report, for example, the Ontario Confederation of University Faculty Associations noted that the response to the crisis has, quote, been inadequately consultative, top-down, and lacking proper process. The report calls for a return to more collegial engagement going forward. Universities are also bound by collective agreements with faculty and librarians, which stipulate workload distribution, the terms of tenure and promotion, and other matters germane to the work of academic professionals. While adherence to these agreements is critical to the smooth functioning of the institutions, the labor relations context can sometimes complicate universities' ability to respond quickly to change. As we have seen, universities have evolved to value academic freedom, broad consultation, collegial decision-making, the deliberate development of ideas, and the careful observance of process. While these are all admirable principles, they do not always position universities well to respond nimbly to dynamic conditions. With this model in mind, I want to think through the lessons learned from the pandemic and their implications for the future of the university. Universities will have a key role to play in the recovery from the pandemic. How we manage these structures will decide how our role is defined. We might imagine that the pandemic has ushered in a future where online learning on a broad scale will render obsolete brick-and-mortar campuses populated with students and faculty. We need to be cautious, however, about rushing too quickly to declare the death of in-person university life. Nearly 20 years ago, many predicted that MOOCs, massive online open courses, such as those launched by Coursera and edX, would revolutionize higher education, drawing students away from campuses in favor of digital learning. Once the novelty had worn off, however, MOOCs declined owing to dwindling retention and completion rates. With the advent of the pandemic, universities were quickly forced to move much of their programming into virtual formats. After some time for reflection, here is some of what we've learned about online instruction during COVID. Students and instructors alike have discovered the benefits and shortcomings of online teaching and learning. Online courses provide greater convenience and flexibility, especially for working students, parents of young children, people in remote communities, and adults reskilling for the workforce. Asynchronous delivery appeals to international students living abroad in other time zones, whereas synchronous delivery provides real-time personal interaction. Online learning can also enhance accessibility for students with mobility challenges and other disabilities. On the other hand, online classes can create added stress and anxiety for both instructors and students. A survey conducted by the Brock University Students' Union in fall 2020 cited mental health concerns as a major issue during COVID. Students at Brock and elsewhere want to return to having on-campus classes and activities as soon as possible, while continuing to have the choice of hybrid learning options. With these lessons in mind, we can imagine several advantages for universities in strategically adapting their future programming to a hybrid model. Students will enjoy more remote options, more personal choice, and more customization of their programs. Experiential learning opportunities through virtual and augmented reality will be enhanced. Faculty will have more flexibility around time for research, scholarship, and creative activities. Universities will be able to use infrastructure more creatively, such as alternative scheduling of classrooms. There will be new opportunities for universities and employers to partner on corporate training, micro-credentials, continuing education, and so on. To compete successfully in the online world, however, in a time of diminished budgets, universities will need to invest resources swiftly in state-of-the-art digital technology and the highly trained personnel to support it. Institutions will also need to strike a balance between in-person and online delivery of programs. Many universities are adopting high-flex models in which classes are offered in 3 modalities at once: in-person, online synchronous, and online asynchronous, with students free to move freely from one to the other. Reaching decisions about this new model in time for the coming academic year will require unusually accelerated consultation and consensus. In addition to the rapid shifts in delivery model, the nature of student demand is also evolving. Students can more easily choose to study online at faraway institutions, disrupting traditional recruitment patterns. The age of the student population is also changing. While high school graduates are still the dominant pool, other types of applicants, such as adult learners and working professionals, are growing. With many industries disrupted or permanently shut down by the pandemic, the potential student population for universities has expanded to include people displaced in the workforce, looking for shorter-term credentials through which to upskill or reskill quickly. There will be increased demand for online micro-credentials, part-time study, non-credit options, and professional graduate programs. For many universities, this sort of programming will require the quick adoption of new approval processes and admission categories. It also poses new questions around faculty workload and instructor qualifications. There are increasing opportunities for universities to pursue partnerships with institutions abroad to reach new student populations, but the competition is brisk, requiring prompt strategic action. In this new marketplace, institutional reputation is key, such that larger universities with global brands have a distinct advantage. Another area undergoing rapid transformation is international student recruitment and engagement. With online access, students can pursue studies abroad more easily, taking courses for the first year or more with no residency in Canada. Global learning communities in which international and domestic students enrolled at Canadian institutions live and study together abroad are springing up all over the world. These communities give Canadian universities the opportunity to enhance international student recruitment, to increase brand recognition, to increase domestic student participation in internationalization, and to foster international research opportunities. In addition to the changing international landscape, the pandemic has brought changes to the competitive marketplace in Ontario. Large research-based universities with prominent brands are capitalizing on that recognition to keep their international enrollment stable. Those larger institutions are also using new competitive strategies, such as admitting students with lower averages and going beyond their enrollment corridors to increase their market share. Private universities are posing new competition, as are colleges, which are equipped to respond rapidly to labor force needs. The province is also expanding degree granting capability to colleges in areas such as nursing. Universities in Canada have been slow to embrace collaborative models, including collaboration with the college sector. Universities are increasingly called upon to address urgent questions related to social justice issues that have become prominent over the past year. The Black Lives Matter movement, for instance, has prompted universities such as Brock to play an important role in promoting anti-racism. Additionally, universities are providing leadership and reconciliation with Canada's Indigenous peoples. First Nations University of Canada, where I served as Vice President Academic, serves a national mandate in this area, but universities across the country are responding to the call to indigenize their programs and to decolonize their campuses. This evolving reality requires that universities re-examine key aspects of their work. Given the shifts in the economy caused by the pandemic, universities must also develop new academic programs quickly to attract new student populations, including displaced workers, and to respond to new workforce needs. For example, at Brock, we are developing a new engineering program and continuing education options to meet the changing needs of the marketplace. Finally, there will be new opportunities for researchers to engage with what the post-COVID world requires, balanced with academic freedom. Universities need to learn to engage with local and international communities and to respond to contemporary societal challenges such as the environmental crisis, technological change, workforce automation and the changing nature of work, and systemic racial and economic inequality. Going forward, universities will need to be more responsive to industry while avoiding the pitfalls of corporatization. Here is our challenge. How can we make universities responsive to 21st century thinking and to the many changes brought about by the pandemic? As we have seen, over the centuries, universities have learned to adapt, and they must continue to do so now under extraordinary conditions. Working with the principles of academic freedom and collegial governance, university leaders will look forward for ways to navigate this complex environment and to play an important role in Canada's post-pandemic recovery. Thank you for your attention. We can now open up for questions and discussion.
Lynn, thank you very much for those comments. We've had a number of questions that have come in, and I will do my best to put as many of those as I can. I know there's a great degree of interest from all, especially those who are listening live. So do feel free to put your questions in the chat feature, and we'll get those to Dr. Wells. And Len, I think you're still sharing your screen. So there we go, fantastic. So the first of a few questions here, and I'm gonna, as I look to my right, perhaps your left, as I read in from my other screen. And this speaks to your view of the future of higher education in a post-COVID world. What do you think it might look like? And as an industry level, but also, is there something, are there specific needs and positions that Canadian universities might take? And what are those steps that we here at Brock might be able to take and action on more?
Great, thank you. That's a great question to start with. It's got lots of parts to it. So I would say that the future of the Canadian university, at least from my perspective, is still evolving. And I think the next year or so will be really pivotal in seeing how universities react. As I said in the presentation, we're being called upon to move very quickly. Nobody knows what the world is going to look like a year from now. We would never have anticipated that the year that we've had would be such a major change in the way everything has happened. So looking forward, we're going to see a lot of economic recovery. We're going to see a lot of shifts in industry. We're going to see many shifts in the way people do their work. I do believe that we are going to see many new student populations engaging with universities for the first time, but that means that we need to make accessible the kinds of programming that people really need. And it needs to be shorter term in many cases. Universities don't really focus a lot on short-term credentials. We tend to think in terms of four-year degrees or longer graduate degrees. We need to make accessible higher education that's highly relevant, that's accessible in a short period of time, that responds to those industry needs, but doesn't just do that. We still need to be ourselves. We still need to be centers of knowledge, of research, of curiosity, of intellectual developments, of free speech and engagement. So I think that the trick will be really balancing all of those competing needs. Instead of maintaining our identity as universities of what we have been for centuries and centuries, really the center of human thought and creative development. While responding to a whole series of needs and, of course, responding to priorities of governments that fund us at the same time. That's very important. In terms of Brock, we're doing a great deal already. We've been responsive to the call for micro-credential programming. We've had great ideas come forward from every area of the university. We've had lots of cooperation from Senate around new admission categories for part-time and open studies. And we're really moving as quickly as we can in an extremely competitive environment. Here you're having Robert Luke come speak next time about eCampus Ontario. He's at the forefront of this movement. So I said we're being responsive. We're trying to do all of this in an incredibly challenging budget year as well, right? And that poses more difficulties. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
That's kind of a good segue into the next question. And this is, Brock did not meet its recruitment target, as did many other universities had the same challenges this past year. And given the challenges, the public health challenges that we're seeing, would it be fair to assume that the coming year would be similar? So your thoughts on that? And then the follow-up around that is, how would you balance the need to meet the strategic targets in a world where competitive challenges do exist, like COVID, but at the same time, the expectations for educators and education sector are changing? And what does the new normal in this segment might look like? Great. So again, another multi-part.
Thank you. That's terrific. So let's start with the enrollment question. First of all, when COVID first hit last spring, I think a lot of universities were surprised to see their enrollments immediately jumped up in the spring, summer in online learning, because many students were reacting to the fact that they had jobs that they couldn't take up. And so students moved into taking more classes. I know my own kids did this because they had summer jobs that suddenly disappeared. So spring enrollment went up. When we got to fall, of course, there were challenges for international students. I said many of them could not return to Canada. There are still incredible difficulties for international students to get visas to return to Canada. But on the domestic front, an interesting pattern emerged in Ontario, which is there were a small number of the larger universities whose enrollments went up and went up considerably, whereas the rest of the sector went down. I said earlier, it's a competitive world. This is, one of the manifestations of that competition is that bigger schools like Queen's and McMaster, it's not that they lowered their admission averages, it's just that they have such an enormous pool of applicants they could go down just slightly on their admission levels and still have lots and lots of students willing to come. So there was a bit of a shift in the enrollment pattern, and we're seeing that repeating or seeming to repeat so far this year. The early data from the Ontario University Application Centre projects, again, a shift to the larger universities with some downward effect for universities like Brock and some of our other institutions. So that's challenging. Getting through this 1 year with an enrollment decline was certainly a challenge on the budget side. To do it 2 years in a row is an additional challenge. We're going to have to work very hard to manage through that. The other part of your question was around strategic targets. How do we continue to do these things, right? How do we, not react to the downward pressure of enrollments and our revenues, but instead look to the future? And that's you said at the beginning, I've been doing this for 15 years. Great thing about doing something for a long time is you see patterns. And I've learned as a university leader is that you can't get lost in the present. You have to keep looking forward and figuring out where you need to be in 5 years. And you need to drive towards that despite the difficulties of the present. So we've been working a lot at Brock with, collegial working groups, faculty and administrators, pooling our ideas, pulling together to do interesting new things like micro-credentials, investing in projects like the new engineering program, which may seem, ways off. It will be a couple of years before we're able to introduce it. But we see that as the way of taking us into the future, of introducing new programming, and being really responsive to a changing world. So I said it's this constant, you manage the present, but you look towards the future all the time.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. So you spoke about the challenges that the pandemic has presented in relation to international students and international recruitment. And the next question is, do you think that the pandemic has opened more opportunities for international recruitment and increased the opportunity for students to receive an international education? And I think you spoke to that a little bit. And then bringing it to home, the follow-up is, what are the initiatives that Brock has taken on international recruitment, or intend to do so?
Great, thank you. Yes, so the international landscape, of course, is changing. I spoke in the presentation about what are called global learning communities, and I said these are pods of people, students in their home countries, sometimes with students from Canada going to join them, living together, studying together. And the focus now is on, how we can help international students to do a first year or two staying in their home communities, learning online, and then coming to Canada for a residency period, probably later in the degree. And that's a very different model than what we've had before. But it means building, that kind of brand recognition internationally, but also a sense of community. We can't have students studying abroad, but feeling that they have no connection to the institution. So that could mean things like having faculty going to visit those learning communities, or providing services that are connected to Brock University in those international areas. So I think that this is going to be a really big change. International recruitment before was always focused on finding people somewhere else and bringing them here. Now it's more how can all universities reach across the globe, create those relationships across time zones and in different cultures. In terms of our initiatives at Brock, our Brock International team has just done a phenomenal job of engaging with digital recruitment strategies. We do, of course, work with international agents, but our team has been phenomenal in terms of learning new ways to reach digitally to international students, to have engagement, virtual engagement communities with international students as well as with our domestic students. And we're learning from all of that. All of this experience in the past year has given us new ways of doing things. So we don't need to think perhaps about sending recruiters abroad in the same way that we did before. We're much more adept at leveraging the technology to get done what we need to get done.
That's great. And you're speaking of adapting and to the circumstances and the challenges and opportunities that they bring in. So one of the things that you spoke about, the university is adapting its model of delivery and offering more and newer opportunities in the area of more flexibility with micro-credentials, for example, and certificate paths. How might you address the potential or some perception amongst individuals that may say, well, offering other degrees is diluting and taking away the perceived value of degrees?
I think that goes right back to the idea of what the university is. You know, I'm an English professor by training, as you mentioned, and of course I think that the study of literature and the study of philosophy and related disciplines is core to the university. We can never lose that. We can never lose that sense of identity around the pursuit of knowledge and the values that we've based our existence on for centuries. When resources are limited, and they're always limited in the world of universities, you need to find that kind of balance. And one way of doing that is by introducing cost recovery models. So that things like micro-credentials and non-credit programming can be offered on a basis that obviously funds those programs themselves, but also can feed back into the financial sustainability of the university. That's why we're developing a continuing education function at Brock, and of course the Goodman Group is critical to that kind of thinking as well, that you need to have a kind of cross-pollination in terms of one kind of programming supporting other areas of the university, as said, that are just core and essential to what we are as universities.
Excellent, thank you. Especially for those at Goodman Group, no selfish notions in there, obviously. Of course. This next question here is: what can the community do in support of the next steps to support Brock and it being a major component of our economic and social recovery, not just in Niagara but beyond? We've got a new campus in Burlington coming up. We've got some footprint in Hamilton, for example. What are some of the things that the community at large might be able to do to support our efforts?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm glad you mentioned the new Burlington campus as well being developed. I would say what the community can do a couple of things. First of all, is engage with our programming. Come to seminars like this, webinars, take micro credentials. Really. Be conscious of what the university has to offer to a broad array of people in society, and to help spread that word that universities are changing, we are responding and adapting, and to be engaged with the new kind of programming and to give us suggestions. We really need to know from the community what kinds of programs are most suited to what people need in terms of their working lives, but also what they want to pursue in terms of just new knowledge through curiosity. I would say the other thing that members of the community can do is just be friends of the university system. We all know that the financial situation has been made difficult by the pandemic, and there are many sectors needing support from government. But having those allies in the community who are saying, the university sector really deserves some public support, that they're playing a critical role in the recovery of the province, and that even in difficult times, making sure that universities are financially sustainable is a really important message for community members.
Switching tone a little bit here, cognizant that you have recently joined Brock University, and having done so in this fashion where there's been minimal contact with faculty and staff and our students that would have traditionally happened. So you've really had a difficult time in that sense, and a number of challenges to face. Speaking of being thrown in the deep end of things. What have been some of your highlights in the time that you've been here?
Oh, yes. Oh, well, thank you. That's such a wonderful question. Yes, it's a very strange thing to join an institution during this time. For instance, I've never met you in person, Abdul. I've not met most of my colleagues in person, and I hope to do so very soon. I would say that the highlights really have been the warm welcome that I've received from people at Brock, the number of people who have reached out to send me an email or have a video chat with me or go for a walk socially distanced along the canal when the weather was decent, and just to give me a sense that even though we can't have the usual kinds of interaction that you would have in a new institution, that people are happy that I'm here and really want to help support the work that we're doing together. So to me, that's been the real highlight.
And in terms of looking to the future, we recently saw an announcement by Brock University, but also other universities like Laurentian are speaking to the terms that are coming up. So the spring, summer term, and perhaps into the fall term. So we are taking the position of being ready for in-person delivery, which is fantastic news to be able to prepare for that and have that advance notice around the thinking of where we're going to be. What opportunities do you see over the time that we have between now and then, so that we are better prepared for that in-person delivery? Of course, that transition to in-person is going to take a little bit of time, some adjustment on the part of both faculty, staff, and our students. What might be some words of wisdom around that from yourself?
Well, I keep asking for a crystal ball, which would be very helpful. But in the absence of that, we have a really good fall planning committee. We think we're pretty much on top of what we're going to do in winter and spring, summer. But looking forward to the fall, of course, we're all hoping that by that time, the vast majority of the Canadian population will be vaccinated, that the incidence level of infection will have decreased, we hope to zero. Let's hope for zero. So we're trying to plan for a scenario where we are going to be as open as possible, that we have as many of our classes in person as we can, that we get back to all those things that we all miss so much, like varsity athletics and, fine arts performances, and just, meeting people in the hallway and having a cup of coffee. So we're planning for all of that, but we're of course also trying to maintain some of what's worked really well in COVID. So to continue with some hybrid program delivery so that students have some options around how they pursue their classes, that we continue the good learning that we've had in terms of digital and online service provision, things like mental health services that we've learned to do online very well, or international recruitment, as I mentioned before. There are lots of great things that we've learned through this process, and we want to make sure that we hang on to the good things that have come of this otherwise really difficult situation.
In the decision-making process, obviously, so you spoke of the crystal ball, so I said it is a tough one to foresee where that what future may lay. But in terms of the decision criteria that you're looking at for that transition to in person, what are some of the key elements that you would like to see hit that would give you the confidence that we could proceed with an in-person implementation and an in-person delivery?
Certainly. It's been critical throughout the pandemic period to work really closely with our public health officials and to really listen to what they're saying, and that we've had great cooperation with health officials in the Niagara region. We do, of course, keep very close contact as well with our counterparts in the university sector in Ontario to try to find out what other universities are doing, and not to, kind of follow the leader, but to get a sense of best practices and, what makes sense. And of course, we look around the world and see what's working in other places as well. But as I said, conditions change, as we know, often, and we have to be responsive. Everything we plan has to have a fallback plan. So planning for an in-person fall also means that we have to have kind of shadow plan that says what happens if we can't do that? How do we pivot quickly if we need to offer our courses and research activities and services online again if that's required?
Question that's come here that's a follow-up to this. What are some of the things that Brock could do to prepare and be responsive and quick and nimble in their response to the two changes?
Great. So a lot of that's happening now, and it really is around the kind of collegial discussion that I mentioned in my presentation. We've been talking with Senate and its various committees and program committees around the institution about how they can help to plan for whatever will come in the fall in terms of delivery, but also the new program ideas. It's really getting people engaged with listening to community partners, to industry partners, to students, to government in its priorities. We've had really great collaboration and cooperation working with faculty across the institution and academic leadership to respond to the changing situation. Is that this really is a full institution response. It can't certainly be just senior administration. It really has to be the whole institution engaging. We're also engaged in a brand renewal process right now that the AVP Advancement and I are co-chairing, and that's given us an opportunity to really think in a new way about Brock's identity and reputation, and how to remodel those to respond to the world that we're in right now.
If you could speak to your vision of what is that identity for Brock's future, where would we want to see, or how would you perceive Brock's identity changing, evolving over the coming years, perhaps?
Great. There's so much good to build on at Brock. I'll highlight just a few things. Brock is known as being very accessible, to being responsible to learners from different backgrounds. I myself am a first-generation university graduate, and I know that Brock has many people like that. So I think building on accessibility in every sense, not only for those high school leavers, but for adult learners, as the people in the workforce, people coming to university at different points in their lives. I think accessibility is really critical. Experiential learning. The one thing I knew for certain about Brock before I came here was that Brock is a leader in experiential learning. The institution does a phenomenal job with that, and experiential learning is going to become increasingly important for universities of the future. So I think there's much to build on there. And certainly around issues of social justice and equity. We have the only Black Canadian university president. I think we should be very proud of that. And Dr. Fearon has been a real leader in dealing with issues around social justice. I think we have a lot to build on as an institution in terms of working with Indigenous people, with being more accessible to people from all groups, to responding to the need for more accessibility for students as well. So I said, I think we have a lot to build on, and I think what Brock has as its core identity is very much suited to the 21st century.
We're fast running out of time that we have scheduled here. So I do want to take this opportunity to thank you again, Lynn, for being here, for speaking to our audience, and for taking time out of your busy schedule to share your thoughts and answer the questions that have come through as well.
Great. Well, thank you, Abdul, and to your team and to everyone who tuned in today. I really appreciate your questions. And if you have other thoughts that you'd like to share, I'd be happy to receive them at provost@brocku.ca. So please do feel free to send them along.
Excellent. Thank you for that reminder. And I think this slide that you have, there's some contact information for those as well. And In terms of today's session, that is all that we have the time for this session. But I do want to speak about what's happening next. And on the next session of Business Breeders, we are joined by Dr. Robert Luke, the CEO of eCampus Ontario. So that's in Wednesday week at the same time. I also want to mention that, as you know, Goodman Group is a community-focused learning and development services provider that works to support professionals, businesses, and entrepreneurs pursuing growth through professional development, certificate programs, as well as executive education and consulting services, in addition to the startup supports that we provide. And to that end, Goodman Group is pleased to bring to you a 2-day seminar focusing on the skills, knowledge, and tools required to be a successful project manager. And we will be focusing on the delivery of a high-quality program. That's the core element of what we do. And with that in mind, we have limited the number of virtual seats available. So those seats are filling up fast, and I would encourage you to book yours at your earliest convenience by getting in touch with us, and you can do that through email, which is prodev, PRODEV @brocu.ca, or Goodman Group @brocu.ca. Either of those two will get us in touch with us in case of questions that you may have. And or you are very welcome also to join us and pose your questions through our website, which is brocu.ca/Goodman Group. Well, that is all that we do have time for here today. I do want to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Wells for her contribution and for her time here, but also thank each and every one of you for taking time out of your busy schedule, for taking your break with us. And we will be back again in 2 weeks with Dr. Robert Luke. Until then, I do wish you health, happiness, and stay safe.